Thank you. Thanks very much. I would like to express my gratitude of the very generous welcome we've had in Taipei. And I really enjoyed the short stay we have here, but still. And I changed my slides last night. I thought I wanted to show you a project that we are working on in the Netherlands, but I thought this is somehow inappropriate. So rather than to talk about the projects, I want to go a bit into the way of working, which I think could be interesting as of the point of departure that you're at now in the Nangang area. So I will show some examples of projects that I've worked on that all involve design processes on large-scale, complex urban developments, and rather larger scale than the Nangang site. But I think still these reflections of a way of working can help to rethink what needs to or what can be done. I need to start with a small introduction from the place that I'm from, which is basically the Netherlands and the Randstad area, shown here in the satellite image. And it contains a number of large cities. Amsterdam here, Rotterdam there with a port, harbor, The Hague, Utrecht, and they're all sort of linked up into one big urbanized network. So basically the first thing to show is to realize that this Randstad area is actually part of a much wider, much bigger metropolitan network in northwestern Europe. I think even Richard Florida started to use the night image as a way of analyzing urban development. And as you can see, the Randstad area sort of sits among a very wide urbanized area in northwestern Europe. Shown a bit more in detail, the whole area, basically from Brussels, Cologne, and the Ruhr area downwards, is one large delta, low-lying delta, which is highly urbanized, and which also saw quite a tremendous change from the 1950s onwards. So the post-war period, where you still recognize each of the different cities within a green, empty landscape, towards a situation nowadays, which is really completely different. So we really need to re-understand the whole urban context of this Randstad area. And this is the work I'm currently involved in, rethinking on the level of the Randstad scale all of the urban developments. Let me speed up. I think one of the things to realize is that the Randstad area is actually competing first and foremost with large urbanized regions within the European context. So these are our main competitors, but at the same time, these are the areas with which we cooperate and which we form a really very large-scale network. From about 10 years ago, there's a regular measurement of how these different regions perform, one to another. And this image shows the way the Randstad is performing in this European context. So the yellow blob is showing its position within these 20 urbanized regions. And you can see a couple of things that we are not so good at, and other things that we're quite good at. Of course, the transshipment, for instance, with the Rotterdam harbor being the biggest harbor in Europe, and the Amsterdam harbor being the fourth biggest in Europe. So there's quite logically very important in our area. But another interesting thing to see, for instance, is the capacity of railways. Very, very low comparatively to other parts. And also something like the high-tech jobs, very low comparatively. Not saying that it's not there, but it's actually not growing fast enough compared to the other regions. So what I very often feel is that we do have a number of very internationally highly competitive economic clusters that really perform internationally, and we do have a couple of cities which are sort of supporting these activities, but there's actually rather something missing in between. So these in-between layer that sort of makes a connection between the local urbanized areas and the internationally competing operating clusters is something which is something we need to sort of discover. So most of the projects I'm working on are focusing on introducing this layer or the logic in this layer. So I'm talking about, I will talk about two different but similar situations in which we were in a position to work in between all kinds of different stakeholders and produce a new result. And one of which was put into place by a governmental institution, the province of South Holland. So the southern part of the Randstad area at a certain moment realized this lack of this regional skill and introduced a studio for design and research in between the governmental and policy making layer and the spatial research and design layer, sort of an intermediate that could mediate between the two. And obviously the picture is much more complex than this simple diagram, because there are a wide variety of stakeholders that need to be involved in this process. And this was also the idea to really produce a space where thinking and drawing and designing could be realized using all of the different stakeholders that are needed in this process. And it also, and I think this is an important point, it also was a real space. So there was a place to go to work together, that people recognized, where all of the images and all of the data and all of the drawings were available. So this is a very important point, I think. And it was a place where people got together, where all of these stakeholders could meet and discuss their ideas and really work together on plans. And the second instance is an association I'm currently working for, which is an association of different types of parties. It's governmental bodies, it's NGOs, it's private companies, all with very different backgrounds, all realizing that it's very important to work together on something as important as the international position of the Randstad area. So I'm talking mainly about sort of half of my work now, which is basically what I always call a laboratory work. So really a space of thinking, a space of working together, and a space of creating new ideas that can be set into projects or in new types of policies as a way of output. So I'm now going to just show you a couple of slides from some projects, and then I will try to come to a conclusion with a couple of notes of how could you work. Well, one of the interesting things that's currently happening in the Netherlands is a quite fundamental change from urban development, from a rather greenfield type of large-scale housing development to a much more inner city urbanized, mixed-use kind of development that you see on the bottom, which is very much tied to the existing infrastructures and tries to make use of that and tries to make use of the existing qualities of the existing cities and sort of boosting that up. So this is actually a quite interesting, but also quite complex way of working. So this is a couple of slides from that project. It involved first and foremostly a reuse of the existing railway of the Netherlands. So this is the existing railways, and there is an idea that we need to step up frequency in this railway to almost double within almost 20 years, so that the frequency of trains becomes so high that we can even speak of a metro system rather than a local train system. So really a transferal of an old system to a sort of new system. And how does that influence, in a second phase, all of the areas that surround the existing rail infrastructure and all of the MTR railway lines that are below that and interconnecting that into a new network? And it's interesting to see that already 25% of the existing urbanized area lies within the direct vicinity of these railway lines. So you can really make use of the qualities of the existing urban areas. As a way of starting this project, we thought it was very important to involve all of the local municipalities. There are a lot of municipalities within the Randstad area, so they are all very powerful in terms of spatial planning and in terms of land use planning. And it was very important to involve them in the process of rethinking their areas as being part of a larger network. And the first thing to do then is, of course, to do a process of joint fact-finding. We've sent all of the municipalities a little card with all of the projects we knew about in their direct vicinities of their stations and asked them to return them, just noting where things were missing or where new ideas had sprung up, and with the idea of putting that all together in one overview of a plan of things to change in the next 15 years. And this was the starting point of a whole process where we also involved the municipalities into the way their station could form an interesting point within a much wider network. So we realized at a certain moment when we drew all of the elements together that out of this 25% urbanized area in the direct vicinity of the stations, 20% would anyhow change by means of the existing plans. It was rather a question, so this is really a large amount of space. To give some feel to it, the university town of Delft, for instance, plus a small suburban community put together is about the amount of space that would become that would change within the next 15 to 20 years. So really a possibility to build a whole city, a whole new city, or a whole new idea of a city within a relatively short period of time, just by tweaking all of the plans together in order to cooperate rather than to stand alone. And in a way, it was very important to find a simple measure of seeing how could all of these plans be influenced one by another. So we made a very simple diagram with 4 factors that were the primary drivers of the differences between the different plans, and that involved 2 elements of a space, let's say the density and the mix of use in the existing areas around the station, and 2 that had to do with the network position. So the position in the public transport, both with high speed and lower level public transport, and the position in the road network. And when you would then analyze all of the stations, when they morphologically they would look more or less the same, like these, for instance, these 2 instances of historic towns, you could see that on a larger scale level they actually have a rather different profile, one from the other. So it was interesting to see how can we develop these profiles in order to see what kind of opportunities are within all of these different stations. And we, at a certain moment, realized that there were 9 sort of exemplary situations that could be explored further. And that finally led also to 9 sort of perspectives or atmospheres or environments to be developed along these lines. And then, of course, the whole process of working together started. We had made a calculation model which told us exactly what opportunity for what station was most fit. But when we presented this to all of these municipalities, the conversation immediately stopped, because each of the municipalities wanted to take part in the process of developing their own future, obviously. Very stupid mistake by somehow very sort of close to what you feel like a designer to be able to do, to say, okay, what is the future for the whole area? But actually it's rather a showing of possibilities. So we, at a certain moment, stepped down the limits a little bit, and we found out that actually for each station there are a number of options to work together. And then how to work together on a larger scale level became a very interesting process, where finally we reached a couple of scenarios to work together and to see what type of common future could we want. Currently, we've stepped this process to not involve only the southern part of the Randstad, but actually to include the whole of the Randstad in this process. And we've learned a lot about how mobility and land use sort of influence each other, and how that can lead to certain benefits, and why this doesn't work. So it's actually a process of learning together what are the obstructions in this cycle. And it's also a process of learning who's involved, what type of stakeholders are involved in that process. And in order now to use this complexity, we've designed a serious game, shown here, a couple of screenshots, a sort of interactive model that you can work together on to decide how to develop this whole corridor. And at the same time, it also produces a lot of knowledge about each of the stations. So this is a very important point to realize what is the different potentials for each of the stations, but also what's the data that lies beneath that. So how can you use that data in order to position your stop within a much wider network. Okay, I'm going to show you 2 more projects that concern a little bit different subjects. And one of them was a project which was called the 9 Cities, which was not really concerning 9 cities as points in space or as geographical cities, but more 9 socio-economic environments that hang together. And this is somewhat similar to what we hear about the Nengang area, like what kind of future should it have, what kind of economy is thinkable there, and how to include the existing people and existing businesses. In this project, we've tried to analyze these rather different development opportunities taken from an economic standpoint, and we started off with a quite blunt couple of ideas of what socio-economic environments could be like. So we defined a couple of cities: a city of control, a city of knowledge, well, the creative city, something we hear a lot about now, of course also in the Nengang area, the caring city. So all in all, about 9 cities. And we try to formulate the elements that the socio-economic environments are built up from. So elements that concern working, elements that concern living, elements that concern amenities and services, and elements also that concern space. So how do all these elements hang together to form a certain environment? So one of the first steps to take then was to again involve a lot of different experts from the different fields and try to build together these environments out of the different elements, and to also introduce joker cards to find extra elements that were needed into these environments. As a next step, we've analyzed these together with universities in order to see how the different elements hang together specifically. So, for instance, when we look at businesses that are very much relying on international connectivity, you can also analyze the areas that are most internationally connected. And you can do that with all of these elements. And then at a certain moment you come to the conclusion that there are a certain mix of socio-economic factors, which is much more refined than the idea you started off with, that you can also map in a sort of heat map to see where these opportunities arise within the wider context. Okay, I have to cut short a bit, but anyhow I will zap through a last project that we've done, which concerned actually the use of landscape within the urban surroundings, and which looked very much at the existing agricultural land and the change that would take place in that. So the agricultural land normally in the Dutch planning history was used as a buffer to contain urbanization and sprawl, and actually this project involved it to be seen as more of a network that could equally take part in the urban fabric as would housing and working and other things. So first and foremost, very important to realize this structure on different scale levels, but how does this structure inform a way of use? We have analyzed a couple of different ways of looking at this open green space in between these urbanized areas, and try to rethink the landscape in this fashion, in this mode. So we've tried to analyze them in different ways and also to draw them in different ways. So these are just a couple of examples of maps that we've produced together with all of the different experts in the different fields that we introduce here. And then at the second point, we realized that actually new typologies of space started to arise. So new types of environments that all have a new and interesting place within this open green space arise. So here are just a couple of examples of that. So just to conclude, I think there were a couple of points that I found really interesting in producing all this work, and also that maybe could be interesting to use in the Nangang area. First and foremost, I think it's very important to realize that most and often the most important bits of development are already existing, and it's very often the case of a rereading of the existing. For instance, the rereading of the network that used to be a national train network into a metro system, or this idea of a buffer zone into a network. So this rereading is very often very important to do. So the second point is realize that many local developments depend very strongly on the logic that is of a much higher scale level, and it's very often not what you see, but the part it takes in a much larger network. Then the point of the joint fact-finding is very important. Involve the stakeholders very early on with all of the dangers that entails, but in the end you will reach a much richer outcome and a much more inclusive outcome. Something I'm very prone to is the drawing and redrawing, and really understanding by drawing and drawing again. Like, for instance, the project of the in-between space. And the importance of drawing also with a certain precision. The open availability and accessibility of data to all. This is very important, especially in the Netherlands. Currently, each has its own data and keeps it to itself. This does not produce a new way of looking. You need to be able to open up the data to maybe make it digestible, make it understandable. So that's an important part as well. Then introduce different perspectives of looking at the challenge. So realize that there's not one way of looking at a certain plan, but include the different ideas. And then the three last points. Think of new topologies of space and use. Try to find who's really your client. This is a bit difficult point, but it's very important to push out your results to a lot of people in order to see who to involve. And I think, last point, the continuity of the task. So realize this is always a step in the process which is somehow endless. So, thank you very much.